Hello, everyone. Welcome to Building Creative Worker Power, Policy Priorities, Career Resources, and Worker Protections. Um, I am so excited that everyone's here for Museum Workers Advocacy Day. Thank you guys for being here. Um, I'm going to mute everyone while we're in the session so that we can be respectful of our speaker, but feel free to drop questions in the Q&A or the chat, and I'll make sure that Sasha gets them. I'm very pleased to present Sasha Antingo, Creative Workforce Programs Director of Arts Alliance Illinois. Sasha oversees the Alliance's expansion into policy, advocacy, and resource development to increase the economic stability of Illinois artists and creative workers. Her previous experience with nationally recognized workforce organizations such as Cara Collective, Chicagoland Healthcare Workforce Collaborative, and Talent Rewire focused on systems level improvements from employer policy and practice change to public private cross sector partnerships, all aimed at lowering barriers to strengthen workers and small businesses. Sasha holds an economics degree from DePaul University and is a 2019 Aspen Institute Economic Opportunities Fellow with the Chicagoland Workforce Leadership Academy. She also currently serves as board chair for Northwest Center in Chicago's Belmont Craigen neighborhood. In her spare time, Sasha performs at open mics as a piano vocalist, enjoys being an aunt, and hiking with her pit bull. So without further ado, let's welcome Sasha.
Thanks so much, Jessica. And hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are tuning in from. I'm so glad you could join me today. I'm Program Director for Creative Workers at Arts Alliance Illinois. As Jessica mentioned, it's an honor to be have the opportunity to connect with all of you and to share more about creative worker advocacy and building creative worker power as part of Museum Workers Advocacy Day. It is the season, and here in Illinois, our general session is active, and we'll be going down to Springfield, Illinois, the capital, next week on the 15th and 16th with Arts Alliance advocates, almost 200 advocates coming out this year to support creative workers and to arts education and all the things that Arts Alliance advocates for in the state of Illinois. We really want a healthy creative sector, knowing that that is key to thriving communities. We'll go to the next slide. I think there's a quick agenda. I'll just speak to at a high level for those who are not familiar with Arts Alliance's work. I'll give a quick intro, and then I'll talk through creative worker policy priorities and some of the priorities of our legislative coalition building efforts that have come up throughout this year. We actually just hosted several of them for a creative worker policy briefing a few days ago, and I can share that information with the attendees after this presentation. We'll also have opportunities. I want to speak to the help desk and career resources. So there are several links that Jessica, my partner in crime here, will be able to drop in the chat, and then we can share after as well. Hopefully we have some time for Q&A, but we'll also share opportunities to stay in touch with us following the presentation. Next slide, please. So quick intro of who is Arts Alliance Illinois and what do we do? So next slide. Those of you who are not familiar with Arts Alliance Illinois, we are a statewide serving arts advocacy organization. We are the only statewide arts advocacy organization in Illinois. So we are supporting arts workers, cultural workers, humanities workers, and that's performing artists, visual artists. Really, it goes far beyond just the, I think, traditional thoughts of around like who is the artist, and Arts Alliance has done a lot to define that. And so museum workers certainly falls into that category of cultural workers. And we all know that in some of the most well-visited cities and those, the neighborhoods, the communities that have safer environments, that have higher indicators of health and socio-emotional well-being, have the presence of arts and culture, have museums, have experiential learning opportunities and access to arts activities. So Arts Alliance Illinois is charged with being able to build the creative sector's power. And we do that through advocacy and through connections to resources, all in service of improving the quality of life of communities across the state. We are also the lead in a national coalition, the Creative States Coalition, which has about just under 30 states represented. So that's across the country, other organizations similar to Arts Alliance Illinois, but in other states. And together we look at national policy impacting arts and culture in the country. So when we saw a lot of the cuts from NEA and NEH, it was really, I think, Arts Alliance with other partner coalitions and partner alliances in other states that were really working to support the arts organizations and individual artists affected. You'll see on the screen that we have Illinois Arts Council and DCASE. So maybe in other states, I would imagine there might be similar entities. Illinois Arts Council is the state of Illinois' agency, and I would encourage all of you to also, in your own respective state, look into the State Department that provides public funding for arts and culture. Our big charge every year at Arts Alliance is for the state budget to ensure that there's funding maintained, preserved, and ideally increased year on year, knowing that the cost of living increases each year in this country. And so Illinois Arts Council is, for some communities in the state, the only source of funding for arts and culture. When you go into rural communities and where there isn't a lot of strong there isn't an anchor business or institution that's creating jobs and creating a tax base and the revenue for that community, then you don't really have a source of any other supports for arts and culture, since so much of arts and culture giving and support comes from small business or large institutions. And so it really is so important that our State Department has funding that's equitably distributed, but also that there is continuously year on year preserved funding. And so we're actually getting very ambitious at our Capital Day this year, and we're asking for a 20% increase to Illinois Arts Council's budget because of the cost of living and because the funds that have been set aside each year have continued to decrease. So we are actually at a percentage of funding of the total budget for state of Illinois for arts and culture is the same as it was at this point back in the early 2000s. And so to be able to ask for a 20% increase in just our state line, our budget for arts and culture is such a drop in the bucket for the total budget that the state has to work with for all its programs. And so it's a big ask, but it's really not that much money in terms of increasing in respect to the total state budget. And so that's why advocacy is important. That's why being able to come together with other arts advocates across all these different issues for I think in any state, being able to talk to your legislators and develop those relationships is what allows, we've seen everything from state senators and state representatives earmark appropriations for different communities, for economic development organizations, to earmark certain funds just for arts and culture or just for specific organizations. And so it's really, it matters. It matters to be active and to be civically engaged. At the city level, we have DCASE, and they also do grant making. But for us, we're also advocating in partnership with DCASE for supporting city artists, considering that Chicago is is where a lot of artists end up coming to try to make a living. Next slide, please. And so we have several pillars here at Arts Alliance, and I think a lot of similar organizations to Arts Alliance in other states are looking at workforce development more. What is workforce development? It's a fancy way of just talking about the supports, the investment, the ecosystem of programs and departments and organizations that are helping job seekers get access to training, develop skills, access jobs, and then ensuring that the employers that provide those jobs also have the same level of support. And so we care a lot about the creative workers' economic stability and mobility. And so being able to focus our advocacy efforts on getting more funding for workforce development training programs, more attention to the conditions of the creative worker, and we're going to talk about that in the next slides, but recognizing where there are gaps and where there is not equity in pay, where there is not equitable, safe conditions and resources to ensure that there are safe working conditions, are all kind of rolled up into this body of advocacy that we're doing at Arts Alliance. We've also historically always advocated for arts education and ensuring that there's access to arts arts education K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade. And there's a lot that we are doing with the Illinois State Board of Education and with also Chicago Public Schools. A big part of having access to arts education is making sure there are arts educators. So for us, having a healthy arts and culture ecosystem and organizations means protecting and taking care of the workers behind all of those organizations, providing the activities and the curriculum and the teaching artists, the administrators, but all of those people together make up and ensure that there's quality education in the arts, K through 12. We also provide resource navigation and are continuously working to make better connections to resources, and then at the state level, making sure departments work together to open up access to procurement opportunities, to economic development, and utilizing arts and culture, using artists, using arts organizations to support economic development. We do a lot of research, as you'll see in the last bullet, to make the case for all of that. And we recently just came off of a really successful first Illinois Creative Workforce Summit that brought together a lot of research institutions that have recently conducted studies on the economic health and well-being of artists across the country. And if we go into the next slides, let me see if that's our impact. We'll send the deck after. I want to be mindful of time, so we can go to the next slide. We've just done a lot in terms of being able to get funds and create impact for arts and culture workers and the organizations that they work at. If you have questions as we go along, because I know I'm sharing a lot of info, feel free to throw those in the chat. I think you can do that. I don't know if you can do that, so maybe not, but
Yes, they can.
Okay.
Looking forward to them.
Thanks, Jessica. So next slide. I'm excited to share some of the recent studies and outcomes from research conducted by a few institutions that we featured at our research summit, Illinois Creative Workforce Research Summit, a few weeks ago. So this first group, or the first body of slides, is from SNAP, and SNAP is not to be confused with the food stamps and access to food for those who have food insecurity. But SNAP in this case is the Strategic National Arts Alumni, I want to say PEAS program, but SNAP connects and stays in touch with arts alumni. So those individuals who have gotten degrees and went into formally into post-secondary educational programs at colleges and universities, and then stayed in touch with those individuals, with those who specifically got a degree in fine arts or in some sort of arts and intersectional subject. And so what we were able to learn, and what they have been conducting every year, as you'll see, 300,000 alumni across more than 400 institutions, and then across these different disciplines, from architecture to arts administration, history, therapy, creative writing. I mean, they really attempt to get at the wide spectrum of arts alumni in the country. So if you go to the next slide, a lot of what they wanted to do was understand, how are those individuals doing post-graduation? And so they have something called the Pulse Survey, which goes out yearly. And so you'll see from the most recent Pulse Survey in regards to safety nets, there's some just key findings there in terms of indicators for your for your economic security. Has a lot to do with what we call the social determinants of health. So do you have food? Do you have access to food? Do you have access to, in terms of your physical health, mental health, and the resources to address any issues that come up in that sense? There's also financial security. And so you'll see on this slide everything from, in terms of the percentages of those who've responded across their arts alumni network that receives the Pulse survey. It's just interesting that there is a lower percentage of those who are applying, who have experienced food insecurity and are applying for the other SNAP. And then in terms of those who have access to health insurance, 49%, those, what type of health insurance. If it's through an employer, it means you more likely have a full-time job. If you get health insurance through Medicare or Medicaid, it's likely indicating that you are part-time or self-employed and not earning enough money to qualify. So you're dipping into or for you to be able to access Medicare or Medicaid, there are income qualifiers, and it means that you're below that income level to be able to get health insurance through either of those programs. You'll see that folks are being able to relying on financial assistance or receive some kind of financial assistance from their social networks, and then from other public programs like childcare programs, TANF, or the temporary access for childcare and those who are in need for resources as it relates to having dependents. 34% belong to a union, which also indicates that you likely have a higher wage and stable enough hours, because the union through collective bargaining agreements makes that possible. And then 26% had student loans greater than $80,000, and 40% were not at all confident about the ability to pay back their loans, which kind of goes hand in hand with what we're seeing in terms of the individuals who are working in arts occupations today. And something we've been wanting to know more and understand to inform our advocacy is about the economic conditions of the creative worker today, especially post-COVID, which was the one time when we finally got to see what we as a country were capable of in terms of providing safety nets, social safety nets for all. And for those, many of whom were artists, performing artists who didn't have an unemployment insurance, but had access to such a program during such an economic crisis. And unfortunately, we have seen historically that in this country, so much of support for arts and culture we've only seen that level of support and prioritization for arts and culture during real economic crises. So you think about the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts, was established and formed after the World War as part of a series of programs with the New Deal. And so fast forward to where we are again today and seeing the same kinds of supports for individual artists only came when we were in the middle of an economic crisis due to a worldwide pandemic. Next slide. For those who want to, you can access more data and look at more SNAP-Pulse findings here. So some resources to stay in touch and dig deeper. I think we can share these two after the presentation. Next, some other was great. We also were able to highlight NORC. So NORC is out of University of Chicago, and you'll just see where are individuals who identifies as an artist. And you'll see at the bottom, 21% had at least some form of a formal arts degree. And that was a national study that they had done of like, who are the artists, where are they, how are they doing economically? And you'll see the breakdown of nationally who took their survey, and how they identified as within the arts and across which the different artistic disciplines. And then you'll see in kind of like that orange color focus or breakdown of those who the percentages and the outcomes as it relates to the Midwest. And you'll see a lot of performing artists and a lot of artists also that were coming from the Midwest that took this survey. Next slide, please. I think what's also interesting is the number of, and this also it affirms research that we have done at Arts Alliance across the state when we were surveying and connecting with artists to understand what sorts of resources and supports could Arts Alliance Illinois what could we do to best support artists in that moment? And this is maybe 2 years after COVID. And around the same time, we also learned that so many artists were what we called mixed income workers or polyoccupational workers, meaning they're working in multiple sectors and holding multiple jobs to be able to make ends meet. And many of those jobs had the jobs that artists were working or had said that they were working where they were able to earn majority of their income were financially precarious, meaning that those jobs were either part-time or were on call, or they didn't have predictable hours. Many of like those jobs were temporary. So it makes it difficult to plan. It makes it difficult to save. And so I have always felt that artists were by far the most resilient job seeker and worker when we think of all the various types of workers, when it comes to being able to be resourceful and make things work. But it doesn't mean that we have to. It doesn't mean that we should. And so you'll see that last note at the bottom of the slide here, about half of individuals did indicate that they did uncompensated labor. It's just amazing how so much of arts and culture organizations, and this might track with many of you in the museum space, in the museum world, like the number of volunteers that we rely on in our sector to keep activities and operations going, but how that is precarious because you don't really ever have stable staffing. And we can't blame anyone as a volunteer for leaving their volunteer spot to go actually work a paying job. And it's a lose-lose for both, I think, the individual who may prefer to stay in the museum space or in the arts and culture sector employment opportunity, the volunteer opportunity they have, but they're not getting enough. They're not getting paid any money to stay in that role. So both the museum or both the arts organization and the worker they have to experience some form of a loss. If we go to the next slide, please. And then you'll see finances for individuals who identified as artists had identified or affirmed that they felt financially vulnerable, and third, reliant on public assistance. What's interesting is that those who had indicated being able to actually earn income in their creative practice or their artistic practice or stay in the arts and culture and humanities sector were likely able to do so if they were part of a multiple income household. And so I think it's just important to, again, state how challenging it is for anyone in this country today to stay in the arts and culture sector and experience the same level of financial stability. And so that is a lot of what Arts Alliance advocates for, is the same level of access to resources and support so that one can choose to stay. Doesn't have to leave the arts and culture sector, doesn't have to leave the state of Illinois. If we go into the next slides, I want to just be mindful of time here. It's interesting that despite all of this precarity, individuals in the Midwest reported having pretty high levels of health and mental and emotional health, especially, again, in the Midwest. And I think a lot of that, you'll see also those who had access to health insurance did not get it. It's great that individual artists will get access to insurance, but it's likely not through their arts job or not through their main sort of source of income in the arts. They'll get it through a second job that's not in the arts, or they'll get it from because they are married or part of a household, and that allows them to access those healthcare benefits through like a family plan. And so, again, these are all of this to say the choice is then that puts for any individual who wants to work in the arts and culture, humanities sector, you're most likely going to be faced with some kind of trade-off unless you have a support system. So next slide. I think also SMU Data Arts was another researcher that had shared some interesting findings in terms of where creatives were working and how they were earning post, educational experience. So you'll see creatives with college degrees, they do earn more. So there's still something to be said about getting your education. But the difference is about half the size of that among non-creatives. So even if you have a college degree, you're still making less than somebody who who got a degree that wasn't an arts degree. And self-employed creatives tend to earn less than employed creatives, meaning a W-2 worker. And then you'll see BIPOC women, foreign-born creatives, or those with disabilities earn less. So again, just a lot of disparity and inequity, and that also is reflected in pay. Next slide, please. And then you'll see Chicago specifically. Now, we saw in the previous slides about folks having access to insurance, so that's by state or by region. But in Chicago, it's interesting that more creatives have, at least as surveyed, were likely to receive public assistance. So that is, again, like food stamps or SNAP or some other public program, and then less likely to have health insurance coverage, which is just the interesting dichotomy of that. Like in Chicago, and I think a lot of this has to do, again, with the way work is structured, and where you can find good jobs that offer. And in the arts sector, you would think that there would be a lot more, but while we have a very rich ecosystem of institutions and resources, there is, again, a lot of individual Chicago creatives who I think who try to work as an artist fully and are self-employed, and then therefore are struggling to pay for health insurance. And so either don't have coverage and have just opted not to, or they're working part-time for an institution in the arts, and that is not paying them any health insurance either. And then if we can go 2 slides, you'll see what that leaves us with. We talked about this at our summit. We talk about it at Arts Alliances a lot. Our big argument for investing in the arts and culture and why it's so important to continue to take care of the workforce is what will happen is if they are having a hard time living in the place that they have chosen to live or reside, over time, inevitably they will leave. And so we have seen in Illinois that artists have the highest net out migration, meaning they are leaving. And so that has a lot to do with, again, I think where it has a lot to do with a lack of opportunities, income generating opportunities. And then the idea that if I go to a different city, I can access those opportunities. But cost of living in a lot of those cities like LA, or if you go to New York, again, is a lot higher than it is in Chicago. And it's still very competitive. So we are doing a lot here in Chicago and in Illinois with tax incentive policies to incentivize more films to be shot here, and production. We have theater production tax credits for nonprofits. I will not even take the time to explain that to you because it's so complex. But these are the types of policies to try to attract new business, to create jobs in the creative sector in Illinois, but also there is a big push for better policies to protect the worker so that they can also choose to stay in Illinois. If you can go to the next slide, please. So what has that led to? Arts Alliance last year, we led a statewide engagement strategy. We had a whole year-long time, I guess, 2-year-long. We spent the year doing policy roundtables, doing virtual listening sessions, and then we conducted a statewide survey to arts organizations and creative workers and creative small businesses to understand what do you need. And we used a good jobs framework as a way to ground us in the different types of policies that exist, because so much of good policy means that at every stage of your life, from a healthy birth, as we say, to a dignified death or exit, that at every point when you're in elementary school, the high school, to post-secondary education, college, or the trades, you're working, you're able to earn money and save and generate wealth for you, your family, and your legacy, and then having access to retirement and all of the things like throughout the lifespan is how we at Arts Alliance think about creative worker stability and the policies that map from that. So the 6 policy priorities that have now made up our most current, this is part of our full agenda, but for the creative worker side, we have recognized, as you saw from the previous slides, in the research that's been conducted most recently post-COVID, that we still need pay standards for the arts. There's such disparity in the ways that you can earn money in the arts, because it just there's no compensation standards similar to how you might see compensation standards in professional fields. If you go into law, or if you go into medicine, or if you go into, we'll say, like higher education, there are ways to you can see that there's parity in a lot of those industries, and in terms of salary bands, and what with experience you are more likely to earn. But in arts and culture, it's just very it's not only a fragmented sector, which has led to a lot of inconsistent pay, but what that does is it really makes it difficult, I think, for us as a sector to improve quality of life from a pay lens, because it's just so different. So we have to understand more, and then we want to set standards. And actually, one organization that's doing that very actively is called On Our Team. And of course, I don't think put that as one of the links, but On Our Team is one of the, onourteam.org does compensation standards, and they're trying to incentivize different arts institutions and just institutions in general to be thinking about equitable pay for, and consistent levels of pay for at least theater workers to start, but looking at other industries as well within the arts. We're also, we care very much, and it's probably the most highly expressed need. And so thinking a lot about how do we provide access to affordable benefits, whether you are a 1099 worker or own a small business or are an employee, or all of the three. And so, because that is the reality of a lot of artists, can we have access to benefits? Also expressed was the unique way that artists need to work is we need space. So much about experiencing art and the importance and the way that it, right, as we know, when you go into a museum, that is a space that is activated. And so the ability to have access to more spaces through license reform. In Chicago, you need the PPA license, which is the Public Park and Amusement license, to be able to host events and generate revenue, which is a lot of what's needed for artists to make money from the work that they do. And there's so much work that goes unpaid and unseen into a lot of those very transformative experiences that artists curate, and in activating the space, which then attracts more foot traffic, which generates economic activity. And so the importance of, again, prioritizing space for artists. And this has included housing. We've talked a lot about the need for artist housing, especially in a lot of these vacant buildings that we see post-COVID in the commercial areas of the state. We also know we need more investment into workforce development. And so specifically knowing that artists have a unique way for getting the message out, for storytelling. I think, again, the way a museum works and the way that we can turn those spaces into centers of education and perspective shaping and narrative shifting is so important, and how being able to support artists to do that is the priority that has been expressed by many artists across the state. The Freelance Worker Protection Act was a piece of legislation here in Illinois that was signed June 1st, 2024. And that opened up more protections and supports for the 1099 contractor, not just artists. So this was for all contractors, freelance workers, recognizing how difficult it is to pay your bills. And I can speak from experience when you're working as fully as a contractor, and you are waiting to get paid, and you don't get paid on time, or you don't get paid at all. And that's a very real thing for performing artists who've experienced that, or curators, or just any sort of like artistic consultants that have, curated a space and have gotten, there's the expectation for payment for that work, and then it takes forever to get paid. So there's more protections around that, and having some legislation to fall back on if you experience a lack of payment or lack of timely payment. And then finally, resources and support. So this is all sorts of programs, training. We want to see what we see for healthcare with career pathways. We want to see for artists, what are career path opportunities and possibilities. If we go to the next slides, I think we'll also see, like, these are resources I wanted to share, and then I can also include at the end, but something like the Illinois Freelance Worker Protection Act that shows we need the education for artists about what these pieces of legislation that stand to benefit them are. And when we don't educate, or when there's a lack of awareness about these resources and then they go unused, and that has a ripple effect on our ability to build power and to recognize and elevate the need to support us as a sector, the workers of a sector. So something as small now, I would say, but how impactful it can be when everybody recognizes that as a contractor or as a worker, who's 1099, the importance of honoring a contract and having your own contract and supporting you in developing your own contract, and then how to enforce that. There are workshops and different educational seminars that we'll be doing in the future with Lawyers for the Creative Arts, and so we can share information with this network with NEMPN to be able to make sure that folks can sign up for those types of workshops to learn about. If you are also looking to think about other streams of income you can earn for yourself outside of your museum job, or if you're really looking to expand income generating opportunities, it's so important to know that you have protections in that regard. So this is some of it in terms of the Illinois Freelance Worker Protection Act. Other bills and other coalitions we've worked with, I'll just zip through these, but we can send more of this after the fact. Arts Alliance has sought to build power by building coalitions and joining coalitions and forging relationships with established worker and workforce forward groups and unions, and those who have all come together already to think about worker rights. Artists are also workers. Artists are laborers. So it's important. Cultural workers, laborers, we don't do this for fun. So we want to make sure that we have protections. Some of the coalitions in the next slides, you'll see the pieces of legislation that they're pushing for. So the ones that I think we have gone through this is for, again, state legislature. So for Illinois, and I share these for those who are outside of Illinois, maybe this inspires some ideas. And again, if you talk to your legislators or talk to organizations and organize bills like what's happening in Illinois, we have employment social enterprises. These are businesses that are created to intentionally support the well-being of its employees. It's worker forward. And we wanted to see, I used to I led an employment social enterprise in a previous job before Arts Alliance, and we supported people who face barriers to employment. And so by creating a mission-driven staffing firm, we were able to pay the proper wage, beyond just minimum wage, to individuals for the work that they were doing. And we would contract for different work opportunities with organizations, much like a staffing agency. But the difference was ensuring that everyone had access to healthcare if they were working at least 35 hours a week, and trying to get people 35 hours a week if we didn't have, if that's what they wanted. Some people wanted to work part-time just based on going to school or otherwise. So having more organizations like this, we've found, can support artists being able to form employment social enterprises. And then you can, similar to minority or women-owned businesses, have special access, recognizing how it's hard to compete in the market when you are a smaller entity. But as an entity, you are really thinking about the social well-being of the employees and then the impact of the work that you're doing in the community. And so here in Illinois, we wanted to get a special designation and definition, recognizing employment social enterprises as something uniquely different from just any other small business. And so there are a lot of, there are creative economy small businesses that fall into this category, that would fall into this category of employment social enterprise. And once defined, the next step would be to, similar to women and minority-owned businesses, have special designation to compete for procurement opportunities, and certain things, just how we consciously purchase, conscious consumerism, just knowing that you're going to purchase from an organization that's thinking about artists and thinking about the well-being of those individuals who are part of that business. We also have HB 5422, the first creative workforce development bill that was introduced by Representative Kimberly DuBouclet. She is the co-chair of what's called the Creative Caucus. So Arts Alliance Illinois launched a creative caucus, so a special group of senators and House reps that can join bicameral, bipartisan. These individuals, we engage in salons and these intimate settings to talk about issues that are important to us in the arts and culture sector. And while we have them organized, the legislators, that way, then we can more easily, because they're educated, because they're engaged, then when we introduce something like this bill, it makes sense. We have a caucus that can push for that can get other non-caucus members to think about it, to vote for it. This particular bill will not go anywhere in the state and our general session this year, but we're excited for it just being out there, and we can continue to improve it and refine it. And you'll see it's asking for pretty much everything we could ever want for the arts and culture sector. Part of what we were also it's not embedded in this, it's in the full bill, but having access to guaranteed income is very important, in a world where we are not able to support artists with living wages, and recognizing that artists if the way that projects are structured, the way that it works for someone to work in the arts and culture sector, it's important to recognize that sometimes, at least for the time being, having access to guaranteed income to make up for the income that you cannot earn or generate through jobs, since so many of the employment opportunities in our sector they don't meet the standards for good jobs, having something like guaranteed income would help us fill the gap. And that's something we're also pushing for in Illinois. And we have several. Cook County, which is where Chicago is located, is the first county in the country to permanently include guaranteed income funds in the state budget. So now the Cook County in the county budget. And so Cook County can now take those funds and launch more programs for specific populations to access those guaranteed income funds. Part of it is to help continue studying how people are using that money in hopes of being able to scale that more beyond the county and really across the state would be the goal. On the next slides, you'll also see where other bills that we're looking at that affect arts and culture workers are prompt payment, making sure people get paid if you were running an arts organization. And then JTED funding, jobs, training, and economic development funding, which helps create apprenticeships for the different industries. But we can see the use of JTED funds for teaching artists or those working in museums who are like teaching artists to be able to access a career path, get trained and earn their teaching certification to be a certified teacher in the state of Illinois. JTED funding has made that possible for paraprofessionals. And so we want to see that the same sort of dollars create career path opportunities for teaching artists to become certified teachers. So we've asked and signed on to protecting JTED funding in Illinois. Next slide, please. We're also supporting the Securing the Paid Family and Medical Leave Act. So ensuring that Women Employed is the organization that's leading this. And there's several coalitions signed on. There are already 13 states in Washington, D.C. that have paid family and medical leave programs, insurance programs for their states. We just want one for Illinois so that there is guaranteed paid leave for anyone in the state of Illinois if you are sick or if your dependent gets sick to take care for your dependents. And that would be at least up to a week's worth of paid leave is what the ask is. Next slide. Finally, I think there's a couple more. Oh, there's a repeat. Workplace Extreme Temperature Safety Act is a big looking at the working conditions for honestly a lot of factory workers, but there is an intersection for any worker who's working outdoors. A lot of performance artists, a lot of, I think of outdoor installations, anything that is curated outdoors where you're exposed to the elements, or if you're indoors and just ensuring that there is temperature caps and that there are everything that the employer is providing, or the contractor, whoever's contracting you as a worker, that you are provided breaks and water and all the things so you have a safe working condition. And then finally, I think just looking, we are also working with Illinois Small Business Majority looking at small business financing. So if many artists are self-employed or have a small business, and just having, there's a lot of predatory sorts of lending instruments that are out in the world that honestly are sometimes tied to, because it's not required at this point in the state of Illinois to have transparency of what your APR rates, what those interest rates are when you are borrowing cash up front or getting a line of credit. So being able to making it law to ensure that there is also, it's very clear when you're signing up for any credit generating instruments, lending instruments, that you know exactly what you're going to have to pay back. And right now it's just the wild, wild west, at least in Illinois. So that's a very big one that we see affecting Illinois' small creative businesses. There's also this amending this push to amend the Illinois Bivens Act. We've seen a lot of ICE actions here in Illinois. We know we are not the only state, obviously, to experience that, but making an amendment to also recognize immigrant and citizenship status is important to us. So you'll see, I think, for all these different bills, part of like our strategy and what I encourage those on this call, if you are wanting to become more active, civically engaged, just educating yourself about the different worker coalitions in your state, and just knowing what are their priorities. There are ways to get, if you're working at an organization, especially just knowing who your advocates, like who is your local arts advocacy organization, and educating them, connecting them with worker coalitions, because there is a very clear intersection about protecting artists and cultural workers, and ensuring that they have access to all the same protections, and most especially looking at pay standards for everyone is, I think, something we can all push for. When we know there are other people in other states that are active, there's some strong alignment, and we have those entities at the national level already working together in terms of those arts alliances coming together across the state by state. I think I want to pivot now into, just quickly, next slides. I want to see, I know I wanted to showcase a little bit about our help desk. So in terms of resources, and I think if you wanted to, Jess, there are just, I shared several links for Jess to put in the chat of career building tools. I know it's, when we think of museum workers and just recognizing the number of skills that, just beyond the number of transferable skills that you all have in working as museum professionals, everything from just communication skills, being able to connect with a variety of audiences. I think there's a lot to be said also in terms of that, like improvisation and thinking on your feet when that happens. So we've heard from artists how challenging it can be when they're looking for jobs that can utilize the experience that they've gained in their current job, or the jobs prior that were maybe, part of more of a career in arts and culture. I need stable income. Where else can I use these skills? What are the other jobs out there? And we've seen some clear connections and some strong the use cases of where, when folks have come to the help desk, and this is the one that we offer for those in Illinois. One thing we've been trying to do in Illinois is respond to the number one need that was expressed to us when we were doing our policy agenda resetting. Was we wanted, the ask from artists was for navigation support, to navigate the many systems that are out there to help between public funding and accessing grants as an artist, or accessing grants to further specific projects in culture and humanities, but then also just support with the ecosystem of public benefits, of housing, food insecurity, support with utility assistance. So our thought is, how can we support artists with having greater economic stability? It's through income generation and thinking of what are ways that artists can utilize their skills and pursue maybe different training programs or degree programs if needed, to secure a better, stable job that doesn't force them to abandon their artistic identity. It's challenging, but it's been possible. So we've supported folks who, most recently, an individual who's former dancer and sort of curator of, she's got theater and improvisation, theater, dance, and improvisation background. So just being able to take a lot of those skills as a communicator and wanting to continue to help, but still take care of her, have a role that would really feel the impact, but utilize those transferable skills that, tied to communication and movement. So we looked at occupational therapy, we looked at speech pathology, the fact that she is a Spanish speaker and the need for Spanish speaking workers, Spanish speaking speech pathologists and occupational therapists is high. So just as an example, just mapping that out, understanding which programs were out there to support that track to pursue speech pathology, and then looking at the sources of potential funding beyond just applying for FAFSA, but knowing that there's also through the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, there are other sources of funding. I think if you go into some of the other slides in this deck, Jess, like WIOA funding, JTED funding, they're just different sources of funding that potentially you could connect to help also cover costs for different training tracks. I always recommend people to go to the American Job Center that's in their local state, in their local region. Every state has a workforce board. Every state has a set of American Job Centers in their local state. And in those American Job Centers, you can get screened for eligibility for various sources of funding beyond just FAFSA, but they'll talk about FAFSA too, to cover training expenses. So between that and then education around arts, thank you. I don't have it in front of me. So I was, in terms of the deck, in terms of Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act and these different sources of funding, something to talk about or to ask when you go to and talk to someone at an American Job Center. Those are the centers I would start with if you're looking for other sources of funding to cover beyond just FAFSA, different degree programs and certification programs. And you'll see between on-the-job, paid work experience, incumbent worker training, these are the types of training dollars that your employer could also look into to cover the expenses for you to train and get a certificate. So I've thought of and looked at various certificates, we just talked about speech pathology, but project management certificates that are offered. There are some short-term certificates in healthcare and in various other industries. The key part is knowing what are the skills that you have. It's hard to articulate that sometimes. So talking with a coach, I would always. I wish I had done more of this, but being able to utilize back at your university, if you finished school, their career centers, if they still have their career resource centers, is connecting with those career coaches. But there are also career coaches, not just in your alumni university or wherever you had gone to school, but going against your local American Job Center. They also have coaches to talk through your experience, to help you develop your resume, and then to look at different sources of funding that you might be able to qualify for, or for you to talk to your employer about. Because sometimes those American Job Centers can talk to employers and help employers think about different sources of funding to help train their workforce, their skilled employees, to upskill in being able to address other operational needs in their organization. So these are sources of funding you could also share with your employer. And again, talking to your local workforce board or your American Job Center in your local area will help. Those are the places that know about WIOA funding and how WIOA funding is distributed and can be used for you or for your employer. Next slides. I know for those who are in Illinois, we had all of our eligibility requirements changed to still qualify for SNAP, for food stamps. And so Illinois has created a new Job Ready Illinois site with online training and virtual access to trainings, which by attending those trainings, you can still at least hit the hours that you would need to qualify for SNAP. I don't know if there's anything like that in other states, but at least for the state of Illinois, to help individuals keep their SNAP benefits, because they're set to lose them May 1st if they if they're the status that they are because of the changes in eligibility. You now you have to be there are a certain number of hours in training or in working or in being in school that you would need to continue earning SNAP. I think I will, in terms of just
Yeah, we got about 5 more minutes before the end of our hour. I don't know if you're ready to transition into Q&A.
Q&A.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm going to stop sharing for now. Well, thank you, Sasha, so much. Virtual round of applause for Sasha.
Mm-hmm.
I learned so much about kind of what I'm in Illinois, but like what our state organizations are doing, and maybe like how we can also look at other states for resources. So, any questions? If you'd like to unmute, feel free, or just drop your question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
We can go over a little bit of time, but want to make sure we have some time for questions. Not seeing anything right away. Will the presentation be available publicly? Yes. The session was recorded. We're going to make sure it's posted up on our YouTube shortly. Sasha also prepared a great list of resources, so we'll make sure to publish that as well. I guess, Sasha, for one question I had was like, whenever talking with legislators, like what kind of data points are the most effective? Is there like, if you had to choose like 1 or 2 types of data points to get like your message across, what seems to work for you?
I think often it really always is going to be most effective if you are knowing what you are, like for arts and culture, just being able to advocate for the funding needed to support just arts and culture, the arts and culture funding within your state. If there's healthy funding for that line item in your state budget, then at least there's the potential for because it's that funding that it's state funding that can provide individual artist grants, that can support museums with operational costs. That, a lot of funding can either be what's called unrestricted or general operational, and then there are very specific types of uses for those funds. But regardless of how that is, just advocating for and really stating and knowing the impact of arts and culture in your local area, the economic generation from the presence of arts and culture is one fact I would look into for each of your states. Like here in Illinois, we often will talk about like how we've been able to help generate $280 million in state and local funding for arts and culture, and that's because of state legislators continuing to approve of maintaining like funds in the state budget each year. We also often talk about the number of actions that already have happened in our network to be able, and this is like, again, arts and culture, but if you are a worker and you want to talk to your legislator, just making that connection of, when we invest in arts and culture, the impact to the local community and socio-emotional benefits and mental health benefits, and there's a direct connection of vibrant communities having healthy arts and culture amenities, like full stop. There's just a very clear connection. If you don't have arts and culture in your community, especially in a rural community, what's your option? You go to a gas station, you go to like the importance of the local theater, the importance of having, this is more cultural, but I've always thought of the library, which is very akin to, like, for some places, the museum potential for a smaller community to be able to showcase educational, to have opportunities in the space to host educational programming. So the importance of making that connection to your legislators of like vibrant communities go hand in hand with the presence of arts and culture access. So it's important to fund it. And just recognizing that artists are arts and culture workers, even if they have a degree, are making half of what degree holders are making in other industries. Like, so how is someone, if that happens, like people are going to leave. I think that's also like a very direct way to like make that connection for your legislator is people can't afford to live in where they have chosen to reside. They are going to move, and you lose your tax base, you lose your voter base, so those are some, hopefully that's like very concrete.
Yeah, those are great points. Especially like the connection. I know in the museum space, there's a researcher named John Falk, who looks at the impact of museums on space and really kind of talks about the physical, mental, and like social well-being that museums and arts and culture creates. So great to know that knowing like those kind of impacts and like what actions have happened is good to communicate with legislators.
Exactly.
Yeah. Any other questions from the crowd? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Sasha. Another round of applause. Thank you so much for being here for Museum Workers Advocacy Day. We had a comment. This session was so incredibly helpful, and I really appreciate the honesty and hard data, especially as a Chicago arts worker, navigating my first W-2 arts job. Oh my gosh, congrats! Thank you so much. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day, a good lunch break if you're going to join us for other sessions. If you have the opportunity to respond to a survey after this, so you can give us a little bit of feedback, we'd really appreciate it. So thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.